Hi friends, it's Miss Alejandra from the Orland Park Public Library. I'm going to be talking to you today about the Shadowhunter series by Cassandra Clare. There are currently about 4 series along with different books that are collections of short stories. So there is quite a bit in the world. They're all fantastic, but it can be a little intimidating for people that don't understand the series or the timeline of the individual series and books and where to start. So the whole series is about Shadowhunters, which are half angel, half human. They fight and they live in our world to protect humans from demons. So there is a little bit of violence just because they do have to fight demons and destroy them to keep us safe. But for the most part, it's incredibly entertaining, very funny, and just a very creative series overall. So the first book in the series is City of Bones. And this is from the Mortal Instruments series. There are 6 books, and this is really where it all starts. It takes place in Brooklyn, and we've got a main cast of about 5 or 6 different characters, and they're all fantastic. They're funny. Jace is hilarious, and I think a lot of people will really like his humor. And then after the 6 books here, there are a few other series. So Lady Midnight is the first book in the Dark Artifices trilogy, which is the sequel to this original series, the original series of 6. So this is the first book in that other trilogy, and this takes place about 5 years after the events of the Mortal Instruments in California. And then outside of these 2, we have The Infernal Devices, which is the prequel trilogy to everything that happens in the Mortal Instruments. So this takes place in 1878 in London, and all of these feature completely different characters than the original one. Obviously, 1878 to the early 2000s, very different people, very different time. And this series is actually my first introduction to steampunk. And for those of you that don't know, steampunk is sort of a genre of fiction where there are technological advancements inspired by the Industrial Revolution. So it is a very different novel and a very different series than the other 2. And the most recently released is Chain of Gold, and this is the first book in the newest trilogy. This takes place after the Infernal Devices, but before the Mortal Instruments. So it is kind of a weird timeline. She does a lot of hopping around. Like I said, 4 different series, 4 different sets of characters, 4 different timelines, and it is a lot to understand how to read and where to begin. So the way I would suggest is to start off with the Mortal Instruments, which is the original series. That is the way that it was published, and that is the way it's intended to be read. However, City of Bones, City of Ash, and City of Glass, which are the first 3 books in this series, were released consecutively. After those 3, she released Clockwork Angel, which is the first book in the Infernal Devices. After this one, she released Book 4 of the Mortal Instruments, City of Fallen Angels. After City of Fallen Angels, which is Book 4, she released Book 2 of this series, which is Clockwork Prince. After Clockwork Prince, she released Book 5 of the Mortal Instruments, which is City of Lost Souls. After Book 5, she released Book 3, which is the final book in this trilogy. It really is just 3, and that one is Clockwork Princess. So she kind of staggered those, and the reason she did it is because a lot of the newer characters that are introduced in the second half of the Mortal Instruments series have a lot to do with the characters that are in this series. It does involve a lot of their descendants, so it kind of helps to understand what's happening and where things are coming from where you understand the families. So after all of those books were released, she released the final 6th book in the Mortal Instruments series, which is City of Heavenly Fire. So that was sort of the conclusion, and that was the way they were released, that was the way they were intended to be read. I did not do that. For me, that's a little bit too much timeline hopping. I'm not super happy reading them like that. I would have, but I mean, at the time that I started reading them, I think the majority were already released. So I just stuck to the ones in the Mortal Instruments series. I read all, I think, 5. Book 6 had not been released at the time that I started reading them. I read book 5, and then I read all 3 of this one. And when City of Heavenly Fire came out, I read that one. It made perfect sense to me. So you can really go either way. You can hop the timeline if you want, in the way that it was meant to be read because of the order they were released in, or you could stick to the timeline that you've picked. You can start with the prequel trilogy, get a lot of the background information, and then read the Mortal Instruments, or you can start with the Mortal Instruments, read all 6, and then go back to the beginning and read the prequels, and then after that, you can start with the sequel trilogy. So like I said, this does take place in about 5 years after the events of the Mortal Instruments. It takes place in a different state, completely different set of characters. However, again, the characters in this one are somewhat tied to the characters in the Infernal Devices, and even in the Mortal Instruments, although more so in the prequel trilogy. So then there's these 3. They take place afterwards, so I would say if you're going to start reading them, definitely don't start with this one. I don't think the events of this series will make a whole lot of sense unless you have the background information of what happened in the first 2 series. So the newest one that was released, like I said, is Chain of Gold, which is the first book in the last hours, and it is the sequel trilogy to the prequels. So this one goes after the events of this one, before this. I actually am barely about to start reading that. I'm super excited though, because for me, my favorite of any series of these has definitely been the Infernal Devices, and it's probably my favorite series to date of any series that I've read. It does have just a really different setting than the other 2. Like I said, this one takes place in England. The other 2 take place in New York and California. It is a very different timeline. The main character here is very strong, and she's very strong. She's very determined, and I would say she's probably one of the best female characters I've ever read, especially when it comes to this series. Will Herondale and Jem Carstairs are definitely 2 of my absolute favorite characters ever, and I would say if you like love triangles, and this one is definitely for you. This one features what I would consider to be the first real love triangle. Traditionally, it's, we've got 2 people fighting for the love of one person. This one is very different. We have 2 male characters who love each other like brothers, and they both fall in love with the same girl, but they're very determined to not stand in each other's way and ultimately fight for the happiness of, I would say, the happiness of the people they love the most, and they care about each other as much as they care about the girl, and it is a very strong love triangle, and one of the best I've ever read. I hope that made sense. I think if I hold up the books like this, maybe it'll make a little bit more sense, because I know that, like I said, it is a lot of timeline hopping. It is a really weird way to release books. There are currently about, with the collection of short stories out, there's about 19 or 20 books released in this world, so it is a lot. So you've got the Infernal Devices, the Mortal Instruments, the Dark Artifices, and then the last one is The Last Hours. I hope that made a little bit of sense, and I hope if you haven't read them yet, you'll start to read them, or maybe this will help you understand where to begin. It is a fantastic series. She's got, like I said, close to 20 books in them. They're all fantastic. All of these characters are wonderful. I think there's been, there have been times where I've laughed, I've cried. I've absolutely cried with these books, but I love them, and I hope you'll give them a chance. Maybe I'm hoping this will help you. Alright, thanks guys. Bye!